Good afternoon, everyone. The International Parking and Mobility Institute is pleased to present today's presentation, Municipalities, Finance, and Recovery, Current Challenges and Next Steps. My name is Justin Grunert, and I'll be assisting Tiffany Smith in moderating today's Shop Talk. As a reminder, the Shop Talk is being recorded, and we will make the recording available and posted on IPMI's YouTube channel. Before we get started, Dave Honorato, CAP, IPMI Board Chair, would like to say a few words.
Thanks, Justin. And good afternoon and good morning to those on the West Coast. I would also like to thank Rachel and the entire IPMI staff for coordinating these shop talks over the last several weeks. I know they are very busy as they are working to finalize our virtual conference, which will be at the end of this month. Hopefully we'll get to see you there at participation. These are some unprecedented times and not business as usual for most of us, or all of us as we're going through. These shop talks give us the opportunity to hear and see what other individuals and organizations are doing to cope with this pandemic. Today's discussion, as with all shop talks, enable us to share our thoughts, concerns, and even our stress levels with our peers. It's good to know we're not going through this together. By working together, communicating, and sharing our concerns, issues, and how we are dealing with today's new norm, we will get through this crisis together. IPMI is committed by doing their part by providing information with our membership and providing forums for you to communicate with us and your peers. And a special thanks to all of you for your participation today and during these trying times. And I would also like to thank Tiffany for help moderating today's call. Please stay safe and healthy during the next couple of weeks.
Thank you, Dave. Before I turn it over to Tiffany, I would like to go over just a few housekeeping rules for today. If you have a webcam and you're comfortable doing so, please turn your camera on. IPMI wants everyone to feel engaged and participate, and we want to see your smiling faces. We want the shop talk to be just like our regular shop talks, face-to-face and sharing ideas. As a reminder, all participants' lines are muted. We invite everyone to participate. To do so, we ask everyone to please use the raise your hand feature. For online participants, please click on the participants icon in the Zoom control menu. A separate window will pop up. The raise your hand option will appear at the bottom of the participant menu. Once you click the raise your hand button, we will recognize you and unmute your line. Phone participants can press star 9 to raise their hands and then press star 6 to unmute their lines. Once recognized, your microphone will be unmuted and allowed to join the conversation. We ask that you please say your name and the organization that you work for so that way everyone knows who you are. You may also type your question into the chat. Click the chat icon and then type in your question or comment and click send. I will read these to the group later. And now I'm going to turn it over to Tiffany.
Well, hello, everyone. I am excited to be moderating this, what I have called Cars, Cash, and COVID. All of us have realized over the last 8 weeks or so that COVID has basically taken over our lives, and business as we knew it has changed tremendously. I know here for the Parking Authority of River City in Louisville, Kentucky, by March of 2020, we had met our fiscal year budget. We were pretty excited and felt that we were on a trajectory to exceed all things possible by the end of our fiscal year, which is June 30th, 2020. And then on Friday the 13th, COVID decided to take over, much like a horror story, a horror movie that we at one point would look forward to going to see on Friday nights. And everything changed. We began to do the telework. Eventually we had to lay people off, which was extremely unexpected and very disheartening as we had to let people go. A large number of our staff consisted of event personnel, and because we weren't having events, quite frankly, we couldn't justify keeping them on. Those that had roles as maintenance, we held on to them as long as possible, allowing them to clean everything in the garage over and over again. until we realized that it was going to go on longer than we had originally hoped, and we, quite frankly, didn't have the revenue to sustain or justify having staff. We had expected about a 50% reduction in our monthly revenue numbers, and we have been pleasantly surprised. They haven't been affected as drastically, and I'm anxious to hear about other cities and what they've experienced. But for our transient and events, validations, which included our hotels and their valet services and their self-park, it basically ceased almost immediately. Some hotels, some major hotels are even closed altogether and left us with empty garages, which I'm sure many of you have felt. Our meter revenues dropped down by 85%, citation issuance dropped down a third, and then the citation collections dropped down more than half. It's been a very, very sad times around here, but when we look at those compared to what other people are experiencing in terms of sickness and or death, it's a much easier pill to swallow. And I'd like to agree with Dan that now it's always good to know that we're not in this alone, and hopefully this conversation is open to hear what other people are experiencing and how they are dealing with this COVID, how they're dealing with their employees through the COVID. And as we prepare to come out of it, I'm really curious to hear what type of things people are doing to change and adjust to the new normal. We personally had to adopt some policies for monthly parkers that didn't want to quite totally cancel their monthly parking, but what would they do to in the interim? We also had to adopt some policies for long-term developers agreements that we had that were structured to help a valet. And after the business stopped, to expect them to continue to pay the amounts they had paid in the past, which were extremely attractive, then became a financial burden. So we looked to ways to how we could help them stay afloat during this situation. Quite humbly, we also had to go out to some of our vendors, some of our contractors, some of our partners, and ask for some relief as well. And I'm happy to report that we found some that were willing to help us. So it's been a give and give, or push and a pull. I just wanted to ask, what are some of the other cities, municipalities, or other groups that had to make some changes and adopt some policies that they didn't previously have on board?
If you want to join the conversation, please don't hesitate to use the raise your hand function, or you can type into the chat.
Yeah.
All right, Dave.
Hey, Tiffany, we basically saw the same thing. Our actual drop in revenues for April, both in the garages and the meters, was 82%. We estimate in June to be at 100% of revenue, and July to be at 5%. Again, and we adjusted policies for the existing leases somewhat as you did. We had we were inundated with calls for people who didn't want to actually cancel their lease, but they wanted to suspend the lease or a grace period when they had when the state was under a stay-at-home directive from the governor. So they thought that they that wanted to suspend their leases. So we were suspending leases. We probably suspended in excess of 50% of the garage leases, which probably totaled north of about 2,500. And now we're making new policies in anticipation for when we reopen. More so, we're trying to figure out how we do the enforcement and the garage operations. So we're having signs made where, social distance is required. But the big issue is if our garages fill up, how do you keep a limited number of people in a small elevator? So we're encouraging people to, if they park on the levels 1 through 4, to use the stairwells and stuff like that. But again, we're pushing the credit card in and out process, so they don't have to go to the machines and touch pay stations and buttons. All they have to do is handle their own credit card. And on our enforcement end, we're prepared to give them, you know, the necessary gloves and masks, but we're also looking at possibly working with the state now. We attempted to get ticket by mail. It didn't pass before, but we're using it at a different angle now with some leverage saying, hey, we want to abide by the CDC's requirements and we want to do social distancing, and ticket by mail will enable us to do that and not interact with the customers. And some of our surface lots and garages, we're trying to eliminate all the cash handling transactions.
That's very comparable to what we've been doing. Dave, did I hear you say that when, you're expecting it to come back to 100% in June?
New in June.
What did you say in June?
Dave?
Maybe I'm muted. We're anticipating 100% lost revenue in June.
Okay. Did you have a expectation, or I think I mentioned earlier that our fiscal year budget ends on June 30th this year, and we start anew in July. And when we were forecasting for July forward, we had anticipated a reduction for every month and less of a reduction as we were leading into December. Has anyone have a similar budget projections?
Tiffany, Robert Farron raised his hand right when Dave did. So,
Okay, hi, Robert.
Robert, you're unmuted.
Hey, Tiffany. It's great to see everybody. In Columbus, just to give some context, and I'll get to your question about the assumptions and forecasting. We're an on-street operation. Our meter revenue is down 80%. It did fall to down 85%. So we have seen a little uptick since some of the recent orders were lifted. Meters account for about 90% of our revenue stream. So we're overall hit really hard. Our ticket issuance is down 90%. That's a revenue impact on our general fund. A couple of things we've done here. We've frozen positions. We have a number of vacant positions that won't be filled this year. We've frozen salaries. We looked at our 2020 work program and reprioritized. We put a lot of our projects on hold. And I'll talk about that in a second. We're obviously seeing some relief on the contract side from less expenses from our transaction-based contracts on the meters as well as ticket processing. What we're really trying to do is forecast and look at what do future months look like. We were forecasting about 25% of our revenue this month, which we hope we're going to hit. And we kind of every month are increasing anywhere from 10 to 15%. We're hoping to get to anywhere from 50 to 60% as we move into the fall, but that's all considering what Ohio State does and what sporting events in particular in large groups, what those orders look like. But for us, it's really about communication and transparency and just letting folks know we're a division in the city, and we're talking to our department heads and talking about funds. We do inter-fund loans. Some funds are doing better than others. So are there ways that we can stay solvent and smooth things out until we get into 21? Our fiscal year is the calendar year. So we just started the year. We started the year strong. We started with a meter rate increase. So we had pretty bullish expectations for our revenue. And of course, the bottom dropped out March 13th. In terms of our work program, we're kind of focused on two things. We've pivoted a bit. We've talked about asset light in our city, but we're really taking charge with that. We've identified about 15% of our single space meter footprint that we're going to remove over the next month or two and replace with kiosks as well as mobile pay only, and try to start cutting down on the operational expenses as well as increase contactless payment. And then we're looking at our loading zones and our curb lane management program and seeing how we can go to market and see if the market will respond to solutions to monetize the curb, because the parking revenue has obviously been decimated, but the loading still continues, pickups and drop-offs still continue. So we're going to investigate and see if we can find a revenue stream there and try to diversify the revenue stream a bit.
That's more.
Tiffany, I got a couple comments before we go to Mark Lyons. Jennifer Casper wrote in the chat, our city commission will be voting on our proposal to offer a 50% reduction to monthly parkers for the month of April and a 25% reduction for May and June. We were able to work with our Parks Department to transfer our parking violation checkers temporarily to help maintain parks in lieu of them hiring seasonal staff since the parks are still open in Michigan. Next one was from Tom Wozniak. We've had and continue to have several impacts to our operation in the city of Milwaukee, including furlough 2/3 of our parking enforcement staff and half of our tow lot staff effective this week. So with that being said, Mark, the floor is yours.
Mark's on mute.
Mark, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
I thought you were in control. Good to see everybody and talk to you and to know that you're still in place. It's there's a lot going on in all of our different cities, and you know, I'll just sort of juxtapose what we're doing compared to Robert and some of the other larger communities. Many of you might recall that we launched paid parking in our beach community just over a year ago, and in downtown about 7 or 8 months ago. So we were just starting to get some legs underneath us, and this hit. Unfortunately, even though it's had dramatic impact, our revenues have gone down 95%. We didn't shut off any of our systems. We didn't make any statements that we weren't requiring parking. And I know it's somewhat vague and ambiguous, but we left it up to the individual to make their own decision on what they would do. And we certainly encouraged anybody that sought out that question, because in this community, people are still asking, do I need to pay? And they don't quite understand. Fortunately, in terms of staffing, we've not had to lay anyone off except for our part-time staff. And that's provided enough savings throughout the year that's going to be significant. And also, though, I would tell you that we've assumed that we're going to be 3 to 4 months without any revenue. So I'm actually kind of was looking at some revenue figures this morning. The trend is definitely increasing in transaction and revenue. So I'm very happy about that. And it looks like, you know, perhaps we'll get ahead of our year-end estimates. But we've not really, we've got about 85 pay stations around the city. We've not really taken the opportunity to hit the vendors too heavily. Of course, our expenses are not that high from my perspective. And so, you know, we've been focusing so much, really, like a lot of other cities, on trying to find ways to help the businesses reach out to customers. Recently, I think last week, the governor opened up restaurants to 25% occupancy and 100% or as much as possible out on the streets. And so that just timed out with Cinco de Mayo. So you could imagine what Tuesday, May 5th was like. Pretty exciting. And that just sort of kicked off the entire operation. So things were picking up, but we were still working on trying to provide permits for those restaurants that want to come out and utilize some of the existing street space. And our policy is, at this point, is that we're going to provide up to 30 days, possibly 60 days, free access to those parking spaces where they extend their cafe permit. And after that time, then we'll look at a reasonable charge to accommodate that permit request. There are also some opportunities. We're looking at street closures. I'm not crazy about this idea, but it's certainly a popular one with some people. Maybe partial street closures to help the businesses again. And, you know, I kind of like the idea of trying to find time or an opportunity to sweeten the pot and sort of get more efficient. But I guess our focus at this stage, since we're still sort of immature in this market, is just trying to respond to the other issues and not look at ways to enhance our revenues. That's not been our focus. So sure, there's some other cities that are facing that same challenge, but it's a little bit different compared to some of the other larger operations.
Yeah, I would, it was interesting to me that you said open up some areas for the restaurants to kind of spread onto are those surface lots, or are you talking about on the street curb space, or?
Tiffany,
Which
they're
one?
actually coming out into the spaces on street,
Okay.
into the main thoroughfares, obviously with a lot of control and restrictions on how it's set up, as well as a clear, layout of spacing and so forth. But they're going to take the parking spaces in some of the most prime areas of town.
I like that idea. I guess the first thing comes to mind, and I'm sure probably the elephant in the room, what do you do then about safety in terms of cars that are coming down the street? And because we've done some of that before, where we've tried to reserve areas like a parking day on a space, and different barriers were put up to try to protect those that might be sitting literally in the street to have a cup of coffee. What type of measures do you have planned to mitigate or protect those that will be sitting in the street while traffic is going?
Yeah, that's a good question. Obviously, we're not coordinating the entire process. We're working with the engineering department, who would look at this very closely. And there are requirements for barricading. Our speed limit's very low in a lot of these areas, 15 miles an hour. So, I mean, that helps us out quite a bit. But each of the permits that go out in the parking spaces have to have proper signage and clean, clear barricading before they can go up. Now, that's inspected by parking enforcement as well as the engineering department.
That's
So
it.
it's, this is Rachel. It's interesting, this came up earlier today, and the Mobility Task Force, reconvened this morning, and Diana Alarcon, City of Tucson, talked about this. I don't think she could join us today, but it's called the Slow Streets Program. So there's actually a nationwide effort, and I know in Philadelphia it's also, bandied about, street closures for open space. But this is obviously a temporary measure designed to better access the sidewalk, and in some cases the street, or the on-street parking, to create greater berth for dining or retail or even delivery, so people can be more separate. And it's actually pretty interesting. She talked about, what the safety requirements were, what that looked like. She's actually going to be following up with some more information, so I'd be happy to share that with everybody. As people are out more and more, what are you allowed to do? You're allowed to walk, you're allowed to bike, you're allowed to go out, especially as a family unit, to do some of those things. So it does really help the retail. It helps keep it alive, and allows people to engage in a different sort of way. So happy to share more. I don't know if anybody's participating in the Slow Streets effort quite yet, but I'll dig up the website and pop it in the chat while we're talking.
All right. And before we get back to the conversation, I'm going to go through some chats that came through here. Gwen Bolden wrote, we found that taking away enforcement to support the transient and business parking, we've actually just opened up street parking for garage patrons. They have suspended their garage leases to park on the street at no cost. Cynthia from Houston wrote, we've had our parking compliance officers assist with Parks and Recreation to monitor crowd control. They issue safety violations. We left our meters on this last week or so. We've been seeing an uptake. Pam Corbin from the City of Orlando posted, the City of Orlando has not laid off or furloughed anybody. Parking enforcement specialists have been assisting maintenance and cleaning our facility. The city CRADDB has just approved $100,000 funding for parking incentives for people to come back to downtown. They've also validated parking for 2 to 3 hours, up to 2 to 3 times with our Park mobile app, and 3-hour parking validations in our garage, which was just approved on Monday. Robert Farron says, in Columbus, we've been asked to look at parking and street closures for outdoor dining. We are looking at the availability of off-street parking for patrons, mix of business, safety, and transit, and other reroute considerations for before we make an official decision.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a lot of great information that's being shared. I commend, and I think it's wonderful for those that didn't have to do any of the furloughing. For ours, I don't know how common this is, but for all of our garage staff and our enforcement staff, they're contracted. And so being able to utilize them in other metro environments was difficult to do. Now, within metro, we have been able to share employees or borrow employees if necessary. But some of our dilemma was the fact that they were contracted employees, and therefore it was a rough day, but we did have to lay off a great deal of those. And then as we're looking to recovering and bringing them back on, we're looking to staging, bringing employees on. We still don't have a plan where we can come back and be 100% staff. We even had to do this with our ambassadors, which are basically security in the garages. And we have found that since COVID-19 hit, there have been a tremendous amount of homeless people that have found their homes and their restrooms in our facilities, and that those that aren't homeless are people that are, it's increased with people trying to steal from the few cars that are there. I'm really interested in hearing, have you seen this in your cities, or has it been business as usual, or are people taking advantage of coming in? Before we get the hands right, anybody that's raising their hands, I know we have Donna King on here that's with the police department. I'd be really interested in hearing her take on that.
Donna, you're unmuted.
Hi. So I'm with Rolls Police Department in California. Population of about 30,000, so we definitely have a smaller parking program. Our downtown core has a city park, so we are still having a small number of people come to the park to do walking and being outside. We left our parking program on. We did a little push. We didn't do a big media release, mostly because there was so much information going out with the beginning with the stay-at-home order. But we allowed any delivery vehicles to park for free if they had some form of display that they were a delivery or takeout vehicle. And we already have 2 hours of free parking. So for those people that are coming to the park, they will have to register. So we did a big push with our mobile application, because we do have pay by plate with the kiosks. Our county is currently in negotiations with the state. The governor has said he's not going to allow us to open yet. And so we're seeing more people start to come out against the stay-at-home order. And so we're in a strange position right now where we do have the parking on. We're not doing any form of enforcement. So some people are paying, but a really small amount. Our revenue has gone really close to zero at this point. So it'll be interesting to see what happens going forward. Our city is also looking at doing some street closures, allowing restaurants to do table service, either in the park or on those street closures. They're going to do hard closures. With only about 600 parking spaces, if they block off a street, that's going to have a big impact on our parking availability. So I'm not sure how that's going to impact going forward. We're also having conversations about whether alcohol service is going to be allowed with the liability, things like that too.
Very interesting. I know when we do turn the faucet back on and we're able to go back into operations, I'm curious in how many cities are you planning to bring all the enforcement officers back in, or are you planning on, I know some have said that they were going to allow some time on the front end on the meters to encourage people to start coming back. coming back to the metered areas, or are you going to just kind of slowly start enforcement back up? When the cities, is there a gauge, or is there some type of barometer that people are going by before they bring all of the enforcement back in effect?
Mark, if you want to add to the conversation.
Yeah, I can share. We implemented our new program sort of step by step, and as we built on the success as we continued. And once we reached a point, now we monitored compliance without any heavy enforcement during that period. Once we reached a point where we thought we had the peak compliance and we saw it start to dip, that's when we went back out and really made ourselves more visible to try and keep the revenues coming. So our goal now is to slowly, incrementally let this all work back in without beating anyone up. And we do actually have a transitional plan that would allow us over 30 to 60 days to provide warnings. And we don't have a warning program in the city through enforcement. It's just, impractical and not sustainable from our standpoint. But during this period, we would use a warning for those people that are not habitual offenders in the past, and then ramp it up to, a warning and then a citation a third time around. Certainly our biggest concern is employees and keeping them off of the prime spaces. So we're watching that real close, and we'll be probably tackling it the same way. And so that, at some point we'll get complaints and there'll be problems that somebody will bring up, and we'll be able to talk about, the prior few weeks where we've had success in the way that we've handled it. And I think it'll help it out. Also, I want to insert a question real quick. I'm curious what everybody's doing with garages. I know some of you are still operating your garages. We went gates up for various reasons. First, to mitigate any contact with people who have problems coming out. But secondly, there's just no use. There's nobody in the garage. As we ramp back up, I'm really focused on trying to make sure that the meter system is a success again. And if we put the gates down prematurely, then that's sort of going to impact the street operation negatively. So I just wanted to see if anybody had any thoughts on that.
I'll start. I know Robert's hand is up as well to address some of the previous dialogue. We struggled with, are we going to lift the gates? Are we going to leave the gates down? And we made the decision to leave the gates down, mainly because we have a 24-hour command center, and they can assist anyone that might have gotten stuck in the garages. Also because we have a number of residents that occupy our garages, and in order to justify having the command center, they needed to be here to answer at least some calls. So we felt comfortable with leaving the gates down. And we had a transitional period before going from raising gates at each night at a certain time and then lowering them back the next day. And we decided it was less confusing to have at least those that were utilizing the garage to be business as usual. Robert, did you want I noticed your hand was raised.
Robert, go ahead.
Yeah, on the enforcement side, on the on-street side, you asked about barometers, and it's kind of two things. One, we're all dealing with what does demand look like for our service, but also what are our city and our authority or organizational policies look like from a protection standpoint. So we've got parallel path. We're at roughly 25% staffing on the operations side, our cashiers, our enforcement officers, our meter techs. And we have a proposal in now to our city HR to get to 50%, but we have to go through a number of mitigating activities to make sure that folks are safe. So putting up plexiglass in between cashier booths and leaving every other cubicle empty. Our enforcement supervisors are in one big bullpen. We've got to spread them out. We've got to stagger folks coming in and change the way we clock in and clock out folks. So we're trying to get to 50%. On the demand side, we're looking at compliance. So we've got sensors in the ground in a couple areas. We're also spot checking with our enforcement staff and looking at the payment data. We never told people we weren't enforcing the meters, but we have relaxed enforcement. And we're trying to determine if the compliance, that delta between compliance and occupancy or payment and occupancy starts to grow, whether that's 5 or 10%, I'm not sure. Right now we have good compliance, but as we start to see that spread happen, that's where, from a policy standpoint, we'll have our officers start to enforce as they would more typically do. And those are around areas where we have access issues. So we're not going to write the tickets if the street's empty and one person's parked there. But if we start to see those pinch points, that's where we start to reintroduce more of our typical enforcement. But it's a staggered approach. It's looking at the data. It's spot checking things. It's looking at our data management systems and making sure that people are following the rules. And then it's around our shopping and retail districts, making sure that if we're having access issues, then we need to come in and start we need to start being more active in our enforcement.
Yeah, I think one of the most sensitive areas for us anyway would be the booting. We suspended booting during this time frame. And actually, I think it was last week, we had a parker, scofflaw, right, that had the boot on and had paid for the boot months ago, right, and then reversed his charges. And then we found the boot vehicle was out and found them. And so operating in their old way of thinking, they immediately booted the vehicle. And then became, okay, here's our opportunity to get this guy that thought he played a fast one on us. But at the same time, we've been on the radio, on the news, in the paper, everywhere that we're not doing any booting. So you kind of had to weigh that off and like, you know what, take the boot off. We got them once, we'll get them again. And I think that's going to be a very sensitive area once we ramp back up, because people are indeed experiencing financial hardship, and it's real. Either they have been laid off or they've been furloughed and they're coming back, and people now are trying to make a determination on paying their mortgage or rent or feeding their children. So where does the boot fit in on all that? I mean, we still have the reality of, oh yeah, I feel bad for you. That's sincere, right? But before all this began, this was a methodical game you were playing with parking, and you have to weigh those out. And I'm real curious, what's the mindset out there on that? Because I don't want to look like the bad guy when we have to reintroduce the boot, but eventually we have to reintroduce the boot.
I'm going to go to Brett Wood. He had his hand up.
Yeah.
Hey, Justin, thanks. Hey, Tiffany. I have more of a question, I guess, for Robert, Mark, Tiffany, anybody else that's kind of in this environment. It's interesting you're using, compliance and following how people are reacting and kind of watching the scofflaws that are historically there. I want to know on the other side of it, like, how are you communicating to the community, how things are ramping up, and are you being pretty transparent about when you're moving back into enforcement and how that works? Because we're walking kind of a fine line right now where people are expecting you not to write tickets, and when do you flip the switch, and how do you let them know why we're doing that?
Yeah, I'll jump in, and then hopefully we'll have some others that will speak to it as well. From our perspective, when the businesses and everything begins to open, because we never stopped enforcement, we will continue to do enforcement. We reduced our enforcement staff by 80%. But when restaurants start to open and can allow patrons in, I feel we have a responsibility, the same responsibility we had pre-COVID, to be issuing citations and enforcing short-term parking, short-term turnover parking. And especially for those that may have stopped their monthly parking or are now continuing to think that we're not enforcing, then if they start utilizing those on-street spaces, then we're in the same problem we had before we began enforcement, which would be people utilizing the spaces, the on-street spaces, for longer than intended, and them not being available for short-term turnover parking to help rotate individuals in and out of these businesses. So we don't have I think it was Mark that mentioned they already have a transitional plan. I wrote that down, something we need to work on. We don't have how that would be staged back in, but as businesses open, I know that we'll start bringing more staff on board to ensure that when patrons want to patronize a restaurant, a bakery, whatever that may be, they can find a space to do that.
Hey, Tiffany, I have a few chats to get caught up on here.
Yeah.
This goes back to the question about the garages. Gwendolyn Bolden wrote, our garages are still open and charging. However, there is no enforcement on the streets, so many of our garage parkers are on the street. Cynthia, I'm assuming from Houston, responding to the booting question. They stopped booting March 8th. We share your consensus. Let's see. Pam Corbin from Orlando goes, Orlando has had garages open, but transient parking has been minimal. We haven't been enforcing on street, but it is not publicized. There are a few people still paying, but the streets are only about 10% occupied. Yeah. Let's see. Mark had a question for the group. Is anyone planning to raise rates as a result of lost revenue? Let's see. Natalie, I work at the parking services for Northern Virginia Community College. We currently suspended enforcement since March. No permit, hang tag, meters, pay stations revenue. We refunded all the permits purchased for the spring semester, around $1 million of lost revenue. So far, we've only been hit a bit more at 50% of our projected revenue for this year, and fiscal year ends on June as well. Again, from Pam, we were planning to raise rates before COVID, but it may be put on hold. We don't necessarily want to hit people when they are already down, but that will be a policy decision for the mayor's office. From Kevin, agreed on the question from Mark, what folks are doing with rates. And then Brent goes, to the rate question, Robert mentioned earlier diversifying revenue streams. Is anyone considering new revenue sources?
Yeah, I don't know if you have any hands up, but we had actually, for our budget FY20 going into the July 19th to January 20th on to June 20th of this year, we had anticipated starting entertainment districts because the events here were doing just so well. We were busy. The city was just popping. There was always something going on, whether it was at the Yum Center or at the Palace or Mercury Ballroom. This is a few of our event areas. And then some of you may know Omni came to Louisville last year, and it just turned the city inside out with the number of different events that were coming there. They were doing phenomenally, better than they had anticipated doing. So we had pockets of entertainment districts that were being planned, and we were going to extend the hours of operations on our meters. And because of this, we have put all of that on a hold, and we don't even have an anticipated date as to when we would extend the hours of operation. And a lot of that has to do with just being very sensitive to the financial climate of today. But I don't know. I'm real curious to anyone that is entertaining proceeding with a rate increase, how they're going to spend that, because I might need that language sometime soon.
Hey, Tiffany, I'm going to turn it over to David Stein from New York.
Yeah.
Thanks, Justin and Tiffany. I mean, I think one of the things to think about, and you just sort of talked about what was in place before all this happened, and ideas, cities are always looking for new revenue, new programs, new pilots. I think one of the things that we're looking at now is what the new demand profiles is going to look like, right? So, if people aren't in transit and they're not commuting, then they're going to be wanting to drive. And, how are our curb regulations and even our pricing policies either encourage people, that a downtown area or retail area that has 1 or 2 hour meters, while when all the shop owners, which are already problematic, are now all parking for 8 hours, is pricing a component of that. And I think those are the things, again, it's very unpopular to have rate increases. We like to call them rate adjustments. The idea kind of being that maybe you don't increase the price for the short-term parking, but if you do want to accommodate a 3-hour or 4-hour stay, then the price increases incrementally. Of course, in New York City, doing a rate increase is much more difficult. But I think it's less about monetizing the curb, but rethinking of, there's definitely a need now for things like commercial loading zones. How could you monetize and use pricing as a tool to encourage turnover? Those are the things I think as we're moving forward that we're starting to kind of think about in the next, medium to short term are there policies or things that we could kind of tweak to get at, using pricing, which obviously brings in revenue as a tool to better manage our curb.
Dave, before we get too far away, Dave Honorata has a question directly for you. Did you suspend your enforcement?
Is he talking to me?
I'm talking to David Stein.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, what was the question about enforcement?
Did you suspend enforcement?
No, actually, so the City of New York did not suspend we did not suspend our meters or enforcement. I like to call it relaxed enforcement. Definitely, traffic and demand is down. I know Rob was talking about, the city did see anywhere from 80 to 90% reduction in meter revenue. It's ticked up as of late. I think people are starting to return back to work. And again, like I said, is business owners and people that are, they're realizing they're driving, they're not taking the subway. But again, I think it's a slippery slope. You don't want to upset the populace. One of the things that we're doing this week, actually, I know some cities have street cleaning regulations. We've suspended them for the last 2 months, and we're going for 1 week where we're going to open up and basically to give sanitation a clean pass. And if any of you are in the tri-state area, I mean, that in of itself is causing a huge uproar and issues. But, I think effective curb management, it's about getting, people still need access to the curb. It's about emergency vehicles being able to traverse our streets. One thing that we are rolling out also, I know this was a topic of conversation, we have incrementally this week started rolling out our Open Streets program, so up to 100 miles. The mayor had come out today with the latest round, and this is actually where we're getting at, retail and community corridors of how do we effectively close those streets, whether through neighborhood partnerships and bids, and or police presence. But the critical thing is they're not closed streets, they're shared streets, so you could still park on them. We still expect you to abide by the parking regulations, the meter regulations. It's just it's limited access, and that's where, like, again, our resources and our focus is at critical locations to ensure safety and the movement of traffic.
That's all very interesting. I noticed that you mentioned the new demand profiles, and for us, for some of the major corporations that we have here, they have already reached out to us about changing that. It's a paradigm shift, quite honestly. And now what? Now that some businesses have been able to realize, hey, a great percentage of our people could actually stay at home and work from home. Well, that'll be an impact for us, obviously, where it pertains to monthly. But what about if those people want to come downtown and work a couple of days a week, or need to come downtown and work a couple of days a week? And we've been looking at working with our revenue control vendor to see how we could propose a plan or propose a technology that would allow them to pay a percentage of what they're paying now for monthly parkers. So if they're thinking now that only 50% of their monthly parkers will be coming downtown, well, how do we do that? And then how do we manage that? How do we look at this number so that it's a quid pro quo? There's a win-win situation here. You're paying for 50%, we're receiving that, or you're not paying for 100% of people that are only coming to work 25% of the time. And that's what we're trying to do now, is be proactive in reaching out to corporations that might be having a different way of doing things when they come back to work? Or is this something that other municipalities are taking a look at? And what type of technology upgrades do you feel are necessary, or what type of proposals are you offering to some of your major corporations to make sure when they make some adjustments to parking that they keep you in mind? Now, I know it's not just the little city of Louisville that is looking at this. So come on, who else is trying to see how they're going to assist their corporates when they come back to work, if they make a decision that everyone doesn't come back to work? And I really think that's a reality, is that some people will probably continue to telework. I saw a story on Good Morning America this morning that were saying that Twitter was having a significant amount of people that would not be returning to the office. And that's going to be a reality for us, and we're just trying to get ahead of it.
Go ahead, Dave.
Hey, Tiffany, it is a difficult question. We're going through the same thing. We have a couple corporate accounts that have 250 or 300 leases with us. How do we handle that? And we're already getting calls from them. We looked with our vendors. It's difficult to we looked at doing weekly or bi-weekly leases, but that's difficult to control. Come in the same 2 weeks. How do you control and monitor, the ins and outs of the vehicles? But what I think we're tending to do is give the companies, the corporate companies, the ability to adjust the number of leases they have. I mean, if they have an account with 250, give them the ability to lower that as they see fit on a weekly basis, a week in advance, instead of holding them accountable for 6 months at 250, and then call us at the beginning of the week and say, hey, we only need 75 this week. We'll be more flexible to adjust what they need, because like you said, we don't want to lose their account completely. 75 leases out of 300 is better than nothing.
Absolutely.
So we're trying to work with the company and not trying to solve it through technology, I guess, right now.
Robert, do you want to add?
Yeah, from the on-street perspective, I mean, there is a hypothesis out there that and by the way, we've heard the same thing from our major employers. The banks, insurance companies, they're not rushing back to the office. In fact, some have already made decisions that they're going to keep a large portion of their staff remote. So that is scary. It's scary from a number of factors: commercial real estate, parking, transportation, our planning efforts around moving people. But on the on-street side, I think there's an opportunity where, you may work remote, but again, you may have to come in the office 1 or 2 days a week. It may hurt the off-street facilities from a monthly parking perspective, but I think on-street you could see some gains there and offer some all-day parking opportunities on the edges of downtown. We have a lot of unlimited time spaces that we could push and actually see an increase in revenue, and something we wouldn't typically see, as well as the folks that ride the bus every day that may not be anymore. So I think there's opportunities from an on-street perspective to capitalize on that. But I think overall, we're going to see a shift, whether it's shorter or it's longer term, in just the population of these employment centers, how they're shifting, and what kind of demands out there for us to capture.
Yeah, I like that. I'm glad you brought that up, Robert, about the on-street capitalization, because we looked before about dynamic pricing, and the mayor was on board that if people want to come down here and pay to park on the street for 8 hours in certain areas, let's let them do it, but let's put a price tag on it. And this might be one of those opportunities, especially if they're only doing it for certain days and kind of doing how do you balance that out? I know here we have operation or oversight on both on street and off, and that differs in some cities, but where it's possible, that makes a lot of sense. I know we're getting close to the end, but I feel like I've done this conversation this justice if I don't at least bring up the on street paradigm shift. What are we doing here? I know we're looking to see about installing more pay stations and more pay by sale to give the patrons an opportunity to have contactless payment measures. Are other cities looking to do that?
We have time for one more comment. So who wants to make it?
I'm
Casey,
gonna ask Brett Wood to make it because I would like to tag him to talk about what we're doing with some of the committees on a roadmap to recovery. If that's okay. And I don't know who I cut off, but I'll buy you a beer. Or coffee.
You're gonna have to buy me a beer too for putting me on the spot.
Okay,
But that's okay.
got it. Sold.
No, yeah, absolutely. Tiffany, one of the things we've been hearing through the Research and Innovation Task Force is kind of the movement to contactless and mobile pay on street. A couple of programs that we've talked to, we're actually going to go out to bid this year for new meter technology and put that on hold to try to see if they can push mobile pay as a primary means of creating contactless payment on street. The tricky part about that is the equity or unbanked issue, and we're trying to figure out what are some options there to give people the ability to still pay as a cash transaction or a card transaction without having to interact with the meter, and it's a little tricky. The other thing, and you brought this up, the move to like dynamic pricing. We're seeing a lot of folks kind of push at this point to try to implement that, and things like that, and creating a wish list of the things that Dave talked about earlier, like automated enforcement, to use those as a means of creating a more seamless parking experience, a more seamless enforcement experience, and getting us to a place where we're not kind of fighting back and forth with some of the compliance and citation issues. To Rachel's point, so and for the folks on this call, we've been documenting today, we are undertaking an effort to try to help understand what programs are doing to open back up. So it's kind of a roadmap to recovery. What are the steps you need to take? And one of the first installations we're going to do in the June magazine is, what do you do from a staffing perspective? What do you do from a cleanliness maintenance perspective? What are some things you can do from a marketing perspective? Pam from Orlando has given some great ideas about working with your downtown group, advertising, some free parking right out of the gate to get people comfortable coming back, and then getting them back in the action of paying for parking and doing those types of things. And then the next piece will be more of the, what do you do from a financial perspective? What do you do from a policy perspective to ramp back up? So the conversations we're having today are extremely helpful to feed that. And then, if any other information you have, you can send that to me, or you can put it on the IPMI forum. We're trying to document all of that. So all the good work the industry is doing can go out to those that are not part of these calls or these conversations.
I have a feeling Justin's going to cut us off, but this has been phenomenal conversation and dialogue for me, and I hope everyone has been very encouraged by some of the either recommendations or some of the solutions that have been proposed today. I thank everyone for jumping on, and I'll turn it over. I'm hoping and very encouraged by the fact that IPM will continue doing similar webinars so that we can stay engaged with one another, because we're together apart, right?
Thank you very much, Tiffany. And then to transition, if you do want to continue the conversation, we do have the forum, forum.parking-mobility.org. It's a great resource to kind of continue the conversations from our shop tops here. Also wanted to touch base. Our next online shop talk is on this Friday, May 15th at 11 a.m. How to not suck at virtual networking in time for our virtual conference. Also wanted to let everyone know about our Stay Connected page. Our community has a long history of being resourceful and helpful during both good and difficult times. Thank you for your membership, your support, and your willingness to jump in and connect, and your dedication to our industry. We are only 18 days away from the IPMI Virtual Conference and Expo, and there's still time for you to register for the conference and expo. It will be packed with more than 40 sessions and 100 speakers, deep diving sessions to explore key topics and opportunities to engage and foster collaborations in building long-time relationships. We also wanted to let everyone know that there is also assistance if needed. IPMI has a CAP scholarship fund available. It is open for individuals who want to pursue their CAP certification, or they need, or or they're going to be recertifying this year or in the future. All scholarship applications will need to be received by May 25th. For more information, please visit the CAP certification page on IPMI's website or contact cap@parking-mobility.org. We hope to see you there. Again, thank you for attending today's Shop Talk. The Shop Talk is copyrighted in 2020 by the International Parking and Mobility Institute with all rights reserved. You may now disconnect. Thank you.